Welcome to another Hogg's vlog, and I've got Snehal with me. We're talking women's cricket and Indian women's cricket as well. Now, they're down in New Zealand and they've had a tough time of it of late. They haven't won a game down there, have they, Snehal?
Nope, 4-0 currently the scoreline, 3 ODIs and 1 T20 down. So the series is gone, but still a couple of games in hand to warm up for the World Cup. We're all telling ourselves that these games don't matter now that the score is 3-0.
Well, does it matter? That's the big question.
Actually, I think that if India win these next two games and go into the World Cup with, a couple of wins from the warm-up, no one's going to really think about this series. If India lose thoroughly 5-0, those would be a few warning signs, but they are playing around with the 11. They've had a few players not available, first choice players. So there are a few conditions apply to this scoreline.
So why aren't those first choice players available, and who are they?
So for the first 3 games, 1 T20 and 2 ODIs, Smriti Mandhana, Renuka Singh and Meghna Singh were not available. So your best batter and your 2 quick bowlers who you want to get some experience in New Zealand are not available because they're in MIQ and we don't know exactly why. So despite multiple questions to the BCCI and multiple people asking these questions, all we have got from the BCCI is they are in MIQ due to New Zealand government rules. Now, why the rules are different for these 3, not sure. Is it possible that there was a COVID infection along the way? Possible. We don't know for sure. Because there's been no confirmation or any communication, we're just making guesses right now. The Indian team had 10 days of quarantine in Mumbai before their 10 days of quarantine in New Zealand. So in that 20-day period, maybe there was a COVID infection somewhere, or maybe some rules were broken which required a longer stay in MIQ. We don't know. But the fact of the matter is these 3 players unavailable for the first few games, and as soon as they got out of MIQ, they weren't played, of course, because having been for 20 days in isolation, won't be in physical fitness, so they weren't played immediately. So it's only in the 4th ODI that India will be full strength.
So they've been in quarantine for 20 days. They've had a bad run of it now against New Zealand. So that 20-day quarantine must have affected their performances going in here. How are they trying to rejuvenate before the World Cup?
I suppose by playing as much as possible. I mean, India are one of the luckier nations that they will get to hit the ground running, and they have gotten to hit the ground running in terms of match practice, even if it's not been the kind of results they wanted. So they are going into this World Cup with 5 ODIs, 1 T20 plus 2 warm-up games than anyone else, which is like a lot more than anyone else. Everyone else will have to come in, quarantine, have 2 warm-up games, and then head into their tournament. So from that sense, India are using this series to warm up for the World Cup. But coming straight out of quarantine and playing a high intensity series has been difficult for India. And I mean, the results and the scoreline does show that.
And what do they need to work on going into the World Cup from what games they've played in New Zealand conditions right now?
Well, one really good thing that we've seen from this team in the last 3 games is that they've consistently hit the 250 plus mark. They hit, I think, 269 in game 2 and 270 in game 3, both batting first, which is usually, which is a good sign because 250 plus has been identified as almost the norm in top flight women's cricket internationally. So for the Indian batting side, without Smriti Mandhana to be hitting those scores is a really good sign. The bad news is they haven't been able to defend those. So New Zealand have been coming and chasing down 250, 270, 280 even, which is a record chase. And that has been the concern. So the bowling unit hasn't been at full strength. Poonam Yadav's performance is a little bit of a worry. I think the biggest worry for India is that if Harmanpreet Kaur isn't going to bowl regularly, they don't have a 6th bowler. And like a T20 game, ODI cricket as well, you need to go into the game with 55 to 60 overs possible because someone is going to have a bad day, especially with such good batting pitches.
Well, you've just brought up Harmanpreet. Now, there's a little bit of conjecture with her performances at the moment because they've dropped Rodriguez for some poor performances, and there seems to be a little bit of an inequality in the way that the team is being selected. Is that causing a problem within the ranks?
Who knows about within the ranks? But I'm sure Harmanpreet, the lack of runs from her is a concern, no doubt. It's weird because she's come into this tournament having been player of the tournament in the WIPL. So she's obviously in good form. We've seen her really hitting some awesome shots. The 6 hitting in WBBL was really, really good. She hasn't been able to translate that into the ODI format, and it's been so weird. She's had a freak dismissal. She's mishit a full toss straight to the fielder. So it just feels like luck isn't going her way. But with Harmanpreet, I mean, she's the kind of player who has shown good performances in the past, and that is what the team is banking on. They're also banking on the fact that she's experienced and therefore will contribute. And like I just said, she's our 6th bowler. So if you drop Harmanpreet, it not only makes the batting weak, but it also makes the bowling weak. So I don't really see how that makes sense.
And your leg spinner's not in form as well. That is a big issue. But when you're playing these little tournaments before a big tournament, you don't want to be peaking out the wrong time. So is she trying to do anything different than what she was doing a couple of weeks ago? Is she trying to make a few variations because of the foreign conditions that she's on?
I think what we've seen about Poonam Yadav in the last year has been that other teams have started playing her differently. It's not that she's doing much different, it's just that the oppositions have had better plans against her. Like, she's a bowler who really gives it so much loop. I mean, she's 4'11", barely 5 feet tall. So she has to give it loop to get the ball at the other end, and gets a lot of wickets stumped because batters, step out with that loop, and suddenly they see the ball isn't as full as they thought it would be, and gets a lot of wickets stumped or bowled with a wrong one as well. What batters have started now doing is sitting back and absolutely waiting for her. Even if it's full, it's slow enough that they can play it off the back foot. So she's had to change the pace at which she bowls a little bit. Now this is, like, you would know, for a spinner to change the pace at which they bowl it can mess up your rhythm and all. I'll let you talk about that. But this is a transition phase that she's going through. Having said that, she is the kind of performer who does well in big tournaments. She was struggling before the T20 World Cup, did really well in the T20 World Cup. So I'm betting that she is going to be in the starting 11 and will come back to some extent for sure.
It's going to be interesting because you're playing in a tournament right now in New Zealand. It's not the World Cup, but when you do come to a World Cup tournament, all of a sudden the batsman's under a lot more pressure. And that's what Yadav's got to think about is, right, they're under more pressure than me. They've got to come after me and continue to hit. So, she can start with her original game plan, but then she's got to learn to be able to bowl quicker. And when they're on the back foot, where are they mainly playing her? Is it more cut shots, cross-bat shots on the leg side, or are they still trying to play her straight?
No, it's been mostly cut shots through the offside and through that square leg area, because in the women's game with only 4 fielders on the boundary allowed, what teams will do is stack the offside and maybe leave deep square leg empty. So they've really been trying to sit back and target that square leg area, and she bowls a very wide line with this kind of a field. She bowls almost on the wide line and tries to turn it away from there. So she's good at that field, but they've also figured out to go batters to go and bat on that wide line and then scoop the ball to square leg. So it's going to be an interesting challenge to see how she copes up.
Now this is where she's got to add a top spinner and a back spinner on, because if they're sitting back, the back spinner can be bowled a little bit fuller. Skids on, that's where you bring in the LBWs and the bolds, because they're not sweeping her off the back foot, are they? They're standing tall and playing it. So,
which is interesting because I've only seen the googly from her as a variation, and she bowls she bowls a decent googly. I mean, that game against Australia in the league stage of the T20 World Cup, she got a lot of wickets with that googly. So she bowls a decent googly, but I haven't really seen her bowl a quicker one because, I mean, like I said, it's so short. It's hard to get. I suppose for a spinner, you need a lot of body behind the ball for a back spinner or top spinner.
Yep. Well, exactly right. But she's small, so when she bowls the back spinner, it's going to even keep a little bit lower than a taller bowler that bowls it. So, hey, Snehal, you better ring the coach of India and get her to just talk to me before that World Cup, and we'll try and get a back spinner and top spinner in there for her. Now, up-and-coming youngsters that are coming through the Indian team right now that we've got to look out for in this T20 World Cup that are going to bamboozle the fans out there.
So I think that Yastika Bhatia, who's been picked essentially as India's number 3, is going to have a good tournament. She showed good signs in the ODIs against New Zealand, the T20 as well. She's gotten starts in all the games, hasn't been able to go on and convert it into a big 50-plus score, but has looked very comfortable at the crease. What it also does is that gives India a left-hander in the top order, and there's a number of, in women's cricket, left-handers are rare, much more rare than they are in men's cricket. So it gives India Smriti Mandhana, Yastika Bhatia, and the option of floating Deepti Sharma. So 3 left-handers in the top 7. So that's essentially, I think, one of the big reasons she's been preferred over Jemima Rodrigues, besides the fact that she made runs in Australia. So I think she's going to have a good tournament. Sabineni Meghna, who's had a great tournament so far, is in the reserves for the World Cup. So she's not going to be in the squad. But should the requirement come in, she's shown that she's going to really do well. And I am going to say on the inexperienced players front, because India are playing every game as a day-night game, I think Meghna Singh is going to do well. Because if India are bowling second and she's got a new ball under lights to work with, I think she's going to do well. A strong outswing bowler, bowls a good Yorker. First World Cup, really inexperienced pace attack. So that's why I'm going to bet on her.
So down there now, they'll be simulating and playing a few day-night games. Are they enjoying that?
No, so in this series, they aren't playing any day-night games. They're playing all-day games. I think only the T20 was a day-night game.
They've got a T20 in a day-night game.
Yep, they played the first game they played was the T20. I think that was a day-night game, but every other game has been a day game.
Yeah, but the rest of the T20s, they're not playing any more T20s.
No more T20s, no. Just one T20.
Are New Zealand allowing them to train under lights?
I'm not sure, but I'm sure if the coach would definitely have thought about this and requested training under lights. And I'm sure they have, I hope they have been training under lights, but they are at Queenstown. And from what I remember of Queenstown, the practice nets are actually outside the ground. The ground has lights, but the practice nets are actually outside the ground. So I don't even know whether they have that option.
It's a fair way away too, I think, the nets, aren't they? It's a good walk, yes. Now, let's go into Indian women's cricket. Now, what have been the big improvements over the last couple of years? So, since 2017, they increased their win percentage from about 50 to 59%, getting closer to Australia. But since 2019, if we just break it up from there, it's just dropped back down to 50%. But there's been improvement there. What have been the big changes?
The Indian side has actually had very mixed results over the last year or so. If you look at series, they lost a series against South Africa, lost the series in England 2-1, lost the series in Australia 2-1, and now have lost the series against New Zealand 3-0. So they've been winning a few games, but they've actually come into this World Cup on the back of 4 series losses. What the danger areas before this have been that they haven't been getting the scores up to the 250 mark, and then just didn't have enough to defend, with pitches being better because matches are played at better stadiums. So it's easier for the batters to score runs. So you have to have a 250 plus score. So figuring out who the batters are which will get you to that 250 plus score has been the challenge. There's been a lot of talk about strike rate. There's been a lot of talk about Mithali Raj. Poonam Raut is one player who has scored runs but has scored them at a strike rate which has seen her left out of the team. And now this team has a number of very aggressive players batting around Mithali Raj. So you have Smriti Mandhana, Shafali Verma, Yastika Bhatia. then Mithali Raj, Harmanpreet Kaur, the two slightly slower strike rate players. Then followed up by Richa Ghosh, who's come in and really impressed from the T20 format. So I think finding the batting formula has been the pursuit of the last 1 year or so. And the biggest improvement has been the fact that 250 plus is now the norm. And we see that across women's cricket. I think India are also going to take a lot of heart from the fact that they've been the only team to beat Australia in the last 3 years in an ODI. I mean, Australia won 26 in a row, then lost to India, and then won 3 more in a row against England. So out of the last 30 ODIs they've played, India has been the only team to beat them, and they came close to beating them twice in that series. So that's, I think, one of the huge positives for India, because going into this World Cup, Australia are the favorites. You need the belief that you can beat them, and India have done that.
So what you've been saying there, to sum it up, is over the last year there's been a slight change in game plan to try and be more aggressive than what you were 3 or 4 years earlier. So that's probably why there's less wins on the board. So it's a positive in a sense, because you're trying to adapt to the change of game. Now, what about the bowlers? How have they been trying to adapt to defending those type of totals when you know that Australia, England and New Zealand, South Africa, West Indies, to a matter of fact, are always going to be after you? So what strategies are the bowlers changing up for this World Cup?
It's actually going to be interesting to see how the bowlers respond with wickets in the middle overs. And there's always so much talk about the spinners doing well for India, but the spinners have actually struggled over the last year or two, if you look at the numbers. So that's going to be one of the challenge areas. We saw again that New Zealand isn't the kindest place if you're a spinner. But on the other hand, we are at the end of the season, for the end of the New Zealand summer. If there's been a lot of domestic cricket played on these pitches, then maybe there will be something for the spinners. I think what's been interesting has been how spinners respond on pitches where they don't get turned. And so far, it hasn't looked great. So far, they haven't responded brilliantly. It's actually been the pace bowlers who have done better over the last couple of tours. Huge reliance still on Jhulan Goswami at the age of 39, still coming in and knocking over the top order. And India have picked the rest of the bowlers, if I remember correctly, have a combined experience of less than 15 ODIs, less than 15 ODIs in the fast bowlers after her. So it's hugely experienced, 200 almost ODIs Jhulan Goswami, and less than 15 ODIs together for the rest of the bowlers. So that's the biggest challenge.
Well, it's a huge challenge, and this is where the coaches are going to get, this is where they're going to earn their money, because when you've got that inexperience there, all you can do is just go, right, this is the job that you've got to do. Go out there and try and execute it. And then you've got to have a captain that can give them the confidence when things aren't quite going right to say, hey, you're good enough. Let's move along and continue to back yourself when you're bowling. And it's good to have a bit of youth in there too, because they've got nothing to lose. Because most of them haven't played a World Cup before, and when you've got nothing to lose, it's just the journey. Anything can happen. So India are in a good position there. Now, you've just mentioned that India have been the only team to beat Australia of late. What does Indian women's cricket need to do to topple Australia eventually? Because Australia are definitely the lead team at the present moment, but on a consistent basis moving forward.
Oh, so not just in this World Cup?
Not just in this World Cup. I'm thinking for the longevity of the game. So it's a bit like the men when they've come over for the last 2 times and just annihilated Australia. I don't want to really carry on about that because it's a sore point for me. But how far off are the women?
What the women's team needs to do, I mean, starting a women's IPL would help. We saw some of the players who have come out of the IPL. Your Washington Sundar, Natarajan, Shardul Thakur, Rishabh Pant. They played such a huge role in India's wins against Australia on the men's side in the test format. If India start a women's IPL, I think that'll be the biggest accelerator of talent for domestic talent and domestic cricket in India. I mean, you've seen the impact. You can tell us more about the impact that the IPL has made on so many Indian domestic cricketers. Just imagine that rubbing off on women's cricketers, and that would be, I mean, the biggest boost to Indian women's cricket. And therefore, I mean, I talk to other coaching staff and everyone's scared of what happens the day India gets it right with regards to women's cricket, because there's so much talent. We saw S. Meghna come into the side and absolutely smash it against an in-form New Zealand team. So there's so much talent waiting on the outside, waiting to be polished, waiting to be nurtured, waiting to be discovered. Hoggy, you tell me the impact the IPL has made on cricket in India, and just imagine that in women's cricket.
Yeah, look, for me, well, IPL is the fourth biggest or third biggest sporting event in the world, so out of all sports. So that's number one. So they're going to try and attract all the best players. Now, this is where it gets scary for international cricket. If we're just concentrating on the IPL and everyone's trying to aspire to get there, then all of a sudden your grassroots cricket in Australia is all about that rather than producing international players. So your international cricket might drop off. So that's one little aspect that we've got to be careful of. But where IPL cricket is, that's where the money is, that's where the growth of the game is, that's where we get most views around the world, so we've got to keep it going. You need a women's competition over there, definitely. The IPL needs a women's cricket. The good thing is that the Indian cricketers are coming over and playing in the Big Bash. I think that's the best T20 tournament at the moment for women's cricket going at the present moment. So we need to take that over to India and get all the best players over there. And I think how's the funding going to come from the BCCI? That will be the big question. They've just got two more teams in the men. That's going to increase the pie. But is some of that, or is more of that pie going to go to women's cricket? That's the question I'll ask you.
So I actually did a very detailed article on this for CrickBuzz, basically imagining how a women's IPL would work, because I mean, everyone agrees that a women's IPL must exist, but no one really, or I hadn't really gone out and mapped out what the funding would look like. And I had some help from a few people who understand numbers better than me. And I put together what I believe is a viable product, viable broadcast and funding model for the IPL. So this is the best time to start a women's IPL, because like we know, IPL rights come up for auction next year. So the next 5-year cycle of broadcast rights is going to be sold, and they're going to be sold based on the number of matches that are going to be played over 5 years. If you can add a women's IPL to that, which maybe say you add 4 teams to start with, 15 games for the first 2 or 3 years, and then expand to 6 teams later, which will come to about 30 games. You can add about approximately 100 games over 5 years. And I've done the exact details in the article, which I'll share the link, and you can link it below. And that gives you the ability to up your broadcast price by at least 10 to 15%. So that extra 10 to 15%, which will be increased by having 100 odd women's games, is the money that you can use to fund a women's IPL. That's the way I'm thinking about it.
Yep. That's fantastic. And we've got to put a link to that little article down the bottom of the description in the YouTube video in the box, because we've got to make people aware of it. 4 teams first up. Wouldn't you be greedy and go for 5 teams and have more overseas players coming? But that's extra expense.
No, I wouldn't do that. Because I mean, India, the BCCI are really protective of the fact that they want this to be an Indian product, and they don't want it to be a product where overseas players come in and benefit at the expense of Indian players. So I know that, and I kind of echo that sentiment. So for starting off, I'd go for 4 teams. I'd also go for 4 teams because I know that amongst the current 8 to 10 teams, there's at least 6 teams who are really bullish about women's cricket and would go for a women's IPL team. So if we have 6 teams vying for 4 slots, it will increase the bid amount that those 4 teams would get. So that's why I would go for 4 teams to start with for the first 2 or 3 years, and then expand to 6 teams maybe in a couple of years, and 8 teams soon after that.
Can I have a guess of which teams would be involved?
Go ahead, you're the IPL expert.
KKR.
Yeah, they've been really
Indians.
positive.
Yeah, KKR, Mumbai Indians. I'd say Chennai Super Kings might be involved in there. They're one of the big guns. RCB, they seem to be a little different. So I'm right with those four.
I don't know. I'm just guessing. That there are likely to be 6 out of 8. I don't know who they are.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if Lucknow would be in there as well, because they seem like a thriving little enterprise down there. But that's what you want. You want to see which teams want to get involved in there and do it sooner than later.
Yeah.
Because while IPL cricket's strong, Indian cricket's starting to be on the improve, and it's starting to get some big names out there. You've got to capitalise on it right now. And then these younger players that are going to be like the Pants and the Shreyas Iyers and the Venkatesh Iyers for that matter, they're going to get more exposure earlier, and that's going to be better for Indian cricket moving forward.
Yeah.
Okay, let's finish off because you've got to get going. You've got to go and do some work over there, Snehal. World Cup prediction. Who's going to be playing in the final? Do you reckon India can take it out?
So, the final, I really hope so. I think there's 5 teams who are going to be vying for 4 slots in the knockout rounds. Australia, favourites. England, probably second. South Africa, I would say third, because they've been doing really well over the last 1 year or even more than that. And the 4th slot, I think, is going to be a tussle between the hosts, New Zealand, who have come in red hot, and India, who we know are always a team that you have to look out for at world tournaments. So I think those are my top 4. It's too hard to pick a top 2.
I think we might see something like England out of that top 4. I think they might get knocked out. I think there'll be a few changes in this particular tournament. But Snehal, thank you very much for updating us on women's cricket in India. It's been fantastic, and let's keep following it, the World Cup down there in New Zealand, and let's back India as well as Australia, since this is my vlog as well. Thanks very much, Snehal. Have a great day.
Thanks for having me, Hoggy. See you.